No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 39. Life in authoritarian PM two-tier Keir Starmer's UK just gets worse by the day. Breaking right now, the man who attacked Nigel Farage by brazenly throwing heavy objects at him as he campaigned before the election has escaped prison, being handed a suspended sentence. Meanwhile, Julie Sweeney, the grandmother and carer who sent a Facebook post after Southport, languishes in a prison cell. As crime spirals out of control in lawless Britain, this Labour government is proving they only care about cracking down on one group of people. And Farage isn't happy about it.
Is that why 147,000 people in the last year have been given community resolutions, which means nothing will appear on their police records? That includes offences such as minor sex crimes, violence and possession of weapons such as knives.
Father Calvin Robinson, today's special guest for the entire episode, as he provides his forthright analysis. Also coming up today, Hypocritical BBC snowflake Gary Lineker says he no longer feels comfortable expressing his hard left views because X is owned by Elon Musk. And Katie Hopkins breaks down as she speaks for the first time about being cancelled by the Church of England.
And they came back with, for the avoidance of doubt, these purported losses are vague, unsubstantiated and embarrassing. And that's the bit that's really got me.
I'll show you much more of Katie's emotional breakdown over this really shocking cancellation later in the show. Then in our uncancelled after show today, it is the royal YouTube sensation, according to Taz, returning. And there's big news, actually, why Prince Harry is trying to sully Princess Diana's memory in New York. We'll reveal all about that. You can register to watch it, by the way, on our own website, www.outspoken.live, because this is a safe space, free of censorship, and your support at just £5 a month not only gives you 30 minutes of extra content after the main show every single weekday, it also allows me to continue making this Outspoken daily news show. Let's go. Keir Starmer, the UK's authoritarian Prime Minister who hates one sector of the population, a sector of the population concerned about uncontrolled immigration and an illegal invasion of our border, well, he keeps insisting that it's just a figment of our imagination that the UK is now beset by two-tier justice. And then we keep getting reminded that he's nothing more than a liar. Remember Josh Greeley? The 28-year-old leftist activist who attacked Nigel Farage on the campaign trail as he toured on a bus of Barnsley? Well, breaking right now, Greeley has just escaped jail for that brazen attack on our democracy, attempting to shut down opposition by using violence. He was sentenced to 6 weeks in jail, but wait for it, that sentence was suspended for 12 months, even though the district judge said the crime merited time behind bars. Surely, if there was ever an opportunity to prove to the British public that attacks on controversial Conservative politicians are not acceptable, especially after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, then this was the moment. But no, because we all know two-tier justice is now prevalent. So as the scumbag Greeley is set free, he will not spend a day in prison. Julie Sweeney languishes behind bars. You'll remember her, 53-year-old from Kidsgrove. She lived a quiet, sheltered life in Cheshire, primary caregiver to her ill husband, grandmother of 3. She made an inappropriate comment on Facebook in the wake of the Southport massacre that she instantly regretted and tried to delete. Also languishing behind bars, David Spring, The 61-year-old, former train driver from Sutton, who had never been in trouble with the law once in his life, but confronted the police at a protest outside Downing Street, even though footage shows he did absolutely nothing violent. And there's Sellafield worker Lee Joseph Dunn. This guy's in prison. Guess what for? Sharing 3 memes. Not to mention the 67-year-old pensioner David Notley of Essex. He's behind bars for 20 months for shouting, "You're not English anymore," at police officers. Now, ironically, it was Farage himself who was calling out this sort of two-tier justice just last night.
Is that why 147,000 people in the last year have been given community resolutions, which means nothing will appear on their police records? That includes offences such as minor sex crimes, violence, and possession of weapons such as knives. Oh, and by the way, if you want to go shoplifting, that's absolutely fine. Unless you nick 200 quid's worth, we won't even bother to have a look. And whilst he's getting tough on violent disorder on our streets, well, Prime Minister, what about the 61 police officers that were assaulted over the weekend at the Notting Hill Carnival? That's nothing to say of many of the other things that went wrong during that so-called festival.
And we know every day now brings a new criminal horror. One of these people set free or let loose, seemingly for political reasons, why white working class folk are made examples of. How about the story of Mohammed Hassan? This scumbag berated 3 women, calling them prostitutes, for not wearing traditional Asian dress and putting on makeup. He then violently attacked them at a petrol station in Bradford. But the 26-year-old also escaped jail after receiving a suspended sentence. Meanwhile, Stephen Silverman has reminded us all, he's the guy from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, that police have still not tracked down the man who wore that Hamas 7 football shirt. Watch.
Well, it is quite remarkable. And look, there's a general point here on which one would hope the overwhelming majority of people would agree, which is that inciting hatred of any minority is completely unacceptable anywhere, let alone in a civilized democracy.
Yeah.
Be it on race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender preference, threatening or actually carrying out acts of violence against any minority is despicable.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely right that people who engage in that kind of behaviour should feel the full force of the law. The problem is that for the last 10 months, and especially in London, we have been watching a double standard being applied, whereby one form of extremism is clamped down on with an iron fist, while another is treated with an unacceptable level of leniency. Now, the result of that is that through any lack of real deterrence through policing, a climate has been allowed to develop that is permissive with regard to expressions of hatred directed not just at Jewish people, but at Britain as well, and at the liberal democratic values we all rely on to keep us safe.
He's completely true. I think it's really horrifying, and it was a really good point to make. But of course, we have also seen the MSM and political establishment, as Nigel Farage mentioned, tried to ignore the Notting Hill Carnival carnage over the past 2 days, which saw, according to latest tallies, 334 arrests, up from 275 last year, including crimes like 3 life-threatening knife attacks and 5 more stabbings. So it was Jeremy Kyle who's actually, I think, summed up those double standards perfectly.
Here's what I don't get. 330 people were arrested. There were 8 stabbings. 3 people are fighting for their lives. And over 70 police officers, men and women, were stabbed, attacked, assaulted, whatever. And not one sign of Starmer's militia on the streets of Notting Hill. Now, everybody who watches and listens to this station knows what I'm talking about. Is that what we've come to? Because that is 2-tier goddamn policing. Why were those 330 not dragged from their beds this morning on Sky and every other television network so that the country knows that that sort of behaviour in the streets is not allowed? Or is it only if you're from the right? Here's what I don't get.
Good question. I don't get it either. Is it only if you're from the right that authorities will take action after staunch political pressure? Sadly, Jeremy, yes, absolutely. And meanwhile, life in lawless Britain grows worse by the day as real criminals fear absolutely no justice whatsoever. I mean, look at the front of this young thief.
Leave it alone.
What?
Leave it alone. Walk away. Does anyone call the police then? Do you want to stop him? Licking a bite.
He just didn't give a damn. And last night there were gunshots in Enfield, North London.
So right. You so right. You're so right. They killed him. Call the police. Call the police. Give me my phone. Give me my phone. Give me my phone. Let me call the police. He's dead. He's running. He's running. Call the police. Call the police. Call the police. So.
It's unbelievable. But then you think that according to the authorities, they're really going to crack down on so-called hate crimes, right? Rather than those sorts of violent crimes. However, there's been no outrage over the very obvious hate crime, the anti-no white graffiti that's popped up in Birmingham. And as Colin Brazier put it, there is a modern dogma which exists where white people can only perpetrate racism while never being its victim. Almost everyone, regardless of skin colour, knows this to be a fallacy. In coming years, this critical race theory will be tested to destruction. And that's absolutely true. Although I would say right now, it's the two-tier policing and the two-tier justice in this two-tier society that's going to destroy whatever social cohesion we had left first. But now, let me bring in today's outsider. And to discuss what is going on in lawless Britain, two-tier UK, I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative commentator, my friend, Father Calvin Robinson, host of the Fox and Father podcast and the Common Sense Crusade on Lotus Eaters. Calvin, lots to discuss today, but can I get your reaction first to the attacker who targeted Nigel Farage escaping jail, even though the district court judge said that the crime warranted jail time?
It's absolutely outrageous that anyone attacking anyone else in politics should be arrested straight away, because we have to have a safe place for people to stand for election and to represent constituents. And the moment we resort to violence, we lose the democratic argument, and therefore we are removing ourselves from democracy. This young man who threw these concrete bricks at Nigel Farage should be in jail, should be in prison for what he did. It's outrageous that a violent action like that with serious intent to cause harm has been suspended and let off at the same time as all of these people that are getting arrested for social media comments, whether it's hurty words on Facebook or misinformation on Twitter. There's a clear message being sent by our police, by our judiciary, by our politicians, and that is violence is acceptable, but hurty words are not. And we've seen this. There have been headlines. There was one in the Telegraph just this week. Violent offenders let off if they apologise, not charged by the police if they apologise. There's a similar headline to one I saw in March as well. So it's not even a Labour thing. It's just the establishment doesn't seem to want to deal with violent criminals. And that's people who are hurting people and sexually offending against people. These are serious concerns that people doing these things should be removed from civilized society.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there are just so many examples of it now, Calvin. And of course, I think the Farage attacker is particularly shocking. I mean, by the way, he claims that he was only throwing coffee cups, not concrete. But to me, it doesn't matter, Calvin, because the issue is you don't know what's in those coffee cups. You don't know if those coffee cups are filled with battery acid, for example, which is what Jo Brand encouraged folk to throw at Nigel Farage, yet she received no sort of reprimand from the BBC. But the point is, Calvin, at a time when Slippery Starmer, two-tier carers, quite clearly demanding of the justice system disproportionate sentences for white working class folk who took part in the so-called riots, surely this is also where he should be demanding the same sort of tough justice.
Absolutely, it is disproportionate. If Jo Brand incites violence by saying someone should throw acid at someone else, she should be arrested for that. But what we see is people are arrested for potentially inciting violence by using words that some may seem to be hateful or offensive. It doesn't actually make any logical sense. And of course, the situation we're seeing with the so-called far-right riots, which were actually mostly just ordinary working class British people who are upset with the establishment. Anyway, the situation we're seeing with them and the way they're treated versus anything else. And this past weekend, of course, we had Notting Hill Carnival. I used to live up the road from Carnival. I can account for the crimes that we saw being reported by the Metropolitan Police this week. But 230 plus arrests, 3 firearms recovered, over 5 stabbings, at least 2 people left in life-threatening condition in hospital. And that's just the start of it. At least 8 sexual offences, and that's just the people that report what's being done to them. And so how does Notting Hill Carnival get reported in the mainstream media and or by the police and or by our politicians? Diversity is our strength. This is a great multicultural element of British society. What? So on the one hand, white working class Brits express their disappointment with the establishment and they get called far-right thugs. On the other hand, predominantly black Afro-Caribbeans at Carnival caused mayhem. To me, that looked like a riot with the stabbings and the violence, the sexual assaults, and guns being confiscated. And that's diversity. That's a good thing. How?
Well, with The Guardian, Calvin, The Guardian actually described the event on its front page as one big ball of happiness. Oh yeah, one big ball of happiness where you can be a mother with your daughter nearly stabbed to death. But Calvin, I was interested, we saw it in your post on X just a few moments ago. I was interested that you said that if the event was predominantly white working class Britons rather than immigrants, you think it would be condemned.
100%. And I say this as someone who's half white and half immigrant, that if the case was Notting Hill Carnival was predominantly white working class, the headlines on Sky TV, in The Guardian, on BBC would have been far-right thugs cause violence, sexual assault, found with serious firearms, stabbings left, right and centre. It would have been clamped down upon. The police would have been there storming it. They would have been rushed through the judicial system. They would have been rushed through the courts, sent to prison immediately. But because they happen to be mostly immigrants of African and Caribbean nature, there is a soft-gloved approach. And that doesn't make sense because people in this country want equality under the law. Both white people and Afro-Caribbean people want equality under the law. So why is the establishment and the mainstream media so against that? Well, it's because they make an idol of diversity. And they think if we treat people equally, then we're somehow racist or somehow going to cause a race riot. Actually, by not treating people equally is what's going to cause race riots.
Now, look, I am, of course, completely horrified by the fact that Nigel's attacker got off. But I'd say I'm probably even more horrified by the fact that Mohammed Hassan has not been pictured anywhere. But this is the 26-year-old Calvin who assaulted 3 women at a petrol station in Bradford. Now, He was banged to rights, Calvin. The attack, which lasted for 51 seconds, was captured on CCTV. And according to the Daily Telegraph, and the details are so incredibly shocking, he grabbed the driver, slammed her head onto the dashboard of her vehicle. He then grabbed another woman's hair and punched her in the head before hitting the third woman. He did not go to jail, Calvin. He did not go to jail. And you know the reason that he attacked these women is because he said they were quote unquote prostitutes because they were not wearing traditional Asian dress and were wearing makeup. And this is the sort of ideology that we have decided to import into our country. And this guy walks free.
It is British culture that men do not hurt women. It is British values that men do not raise a hand to women because we see them as the fairer sex and we see that men are here to provide and protect for women. That has been the traditional sense in British values. Some other cultures have values where women are lesser than men and they can beat their women if they do not like what they see from their women. And that's what we've imported, people who share those values, unfortunately, that are directly contradictory to our own. And of course, if someone does break the law, if someone does break our values, they should be punished for that. There should be serious consequences for any man who raises a hand towards women. But to suggest that these women are prostitutes because they are dressed in what he deems to be inappropriate, we could have conversations about what appropriate dress for public is, but that's very different to selling your body for sex. It's just insulting, it's offensive, and it's downright un-British.
Of course, and guess what his sentence was, Calvin? 35 rehabilitation activities, 180 hours of unpaid work, electronic tagging for 4 months, and £500 costs. So that will deter absolutely no one. Meanwhile, Calvin, while all of this is going on, the invasion of the UK via the southern border continues. And again, you will not hear about this in the mainstream media today. Nigel Farage, Reform UK leader, has posted on X 526 people crossed the channel yesterday. As I write, 11 boats are mid-channel, yet not a word from our Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Calvin, and I don't really take him seriously at all, but Tom Tugendhat, who is one of the people running for the Conservative Party leadership, has now finally admitted that the military needs to be sent in to tackle small boats. At the same time, we have Starmer, and I know as a Brexiteer like me, you'll be furious about this, in Germany, effectively trying to reverse Brexit by the back door. But he didn't acknowledge at all the fact that there is this fierce debate going on right now, Calvin, in Germany about migration after that fatal terrorist attack in Solingen, where someone who claims to be an ISIS terrorist, who was a illegal immigrant from Syria, knifed 3 innocent folk to death, stabbed multiple others. And finally, this has caused folk in Germany and politicians in Germany to suggest there is actually now a national emergency and that migration has to be restricted. But Starmer doesn't mention a word of it. He just says, oh, it was a terrible event. A terrible event. Well, there's so many of these terrible events, aren't there now, Calvin? No, this was an Islamist attack, and thank goodness politicians in Germany are finally taking it seriously.
Finally, but Germany have had this problem for a long time. They've been at the forefront of all of this, importing mass immigration from Mohammedan countries at their own behest, and the population has started to rise up against the politicians, which is why the politicians are finally addressing it. But we'll have to do similar over here. We have to make our voices heard, because you're right, Keir Starmer gave a very boring speech. He did not address the societal issues that everyone is facing in this country, or that most people are facing in this country. It seems the elite live in their own little bubble. And then I love those memes you've got on the screen. But it seems the elite are in their own little bubble and they don't see the problems that the rest of us are facing. In that knife crime is up. In fact, all crime seems to be up in most of our major cities, to the point that, as you addressed in your monologue, we are seeing no whites graffitied on walls in major cities in Britain. For goodness sake, we had this in the reverse. 70 years ago, when we fought against it. We fought for equality, we fought for diversity in a true sense, And now it's all being undermined because we've gone too far the other way. And our politicians are afraid to address the matter. Even though Mohammedanism accounts for, or Islamism accounts for the vast majority of terrorism in the West, our politicians are still too afraid to talk about it.
Well, of course, and let's be honest, Angela Merkel basically destroyed Germany by opening the doors to illegals. But what's really interesting to me is I'm looking closely at what's going on there, and you've got Friedrich Merz, who is the leader of the CDU, Calvin, but possibly the next chancellor of Germany, and it's not that long before an election there. And listen to what he's saying. And I think this is really instructive, actually. He wants Germany to declare a national emergency so that it can use national law to turn away asylum seekers at its borders, and says if that cannot be adhered to, then I am convinced we have the right to turn people back at Germany's external borders, even though, of course, they are a member of the European Union. So if that discussion is taking place in Germany, my goodness, it needs to take place here. But Keir Starmer doesn't even want to admit that there's an issue, that there's a problem, let alone talk about sending the military in.
Yeah, Keir Starmer's talking instead about rebuilding Britain together. What does that mean? It sounds awfully similar to Build Back Better, doesn't it? If he stopped destroying Britain, maybe we'd have something to rebuild together. But there is no together. There is a difference between the establishment of the politicians, the judiciary, the mainstream media, the police forces, versus the ordinary working class British folk. And whilst there is no party that looks after the ordinary working class British folk, there will never be a together. Unfortunately, we need to build that gap. And Keir Starmer is not the man to do it. I don't understand how he cannot see what's going on around him. In just under 2 months in office, he's caused more division than we saw even throughout COVID or Brexit. And so when he refuses to face up to these matters, the British people are going to get more and more upset, and we're going to see more and more civil unrest. Those riots that they managed to sigh up the end of a few weeks ago, they will come back.
Yeah. And the thing is, look, as I say, I don't take what Tom Tugendhat is saying seriously, because he had ample opportunity as a Conservative cabinet minister to lobby for this and quit if Rishi Sunak wouldn't do what he wanted. But I do think what he's saying is correct. And I think it's the first time I've heard it expressed in this way, Calvin. So Tugendhat has said that the UK's national security demands the same level of commitment that the Royal Navy showed in the fight against slavery almost 200 years ago. And that costs the equivalent of around £50 billion a year. And I agree. If it's going to cost that amount of money to secure our borders, then let's do it. But the issue is, Slippery Starmer doesn't want to secure the borders. He's made that abundantly clear. He wants to throw them open. And we're going to see migrants, and I'm going to talk about this more over the coming days, but we're effectively going to see migrants scattered all around the country. They are coming to your neighbourhood.
Well, indeed. And as for Tom Tugendhat, I really like him as a person. I don't always agree with his policies, but I do think he's a good man. And we need these people within the Conservatives to start speaking up on these issues. And thankfully, he is starting to get a bit bolder. And so maybe they'll all take some encouragement from that, because we do need to protect our borders. We are not a country without borders. Unless we define our borders, we are just a partisan globalist smush of everyone living everywhere. And that may be the future that some people want, but it's not the future that the majority of us want. And so when he talks about using the military to patrol our borders, I'm like, yes, please, let's have some of that. Of course, Keir Starmer is against it because he is a massive globalist himself, and he's already hinting at trying to rejoin some kind of relationship with the European Union, which is, of course, more federalism and more globalism, when the British public have made it very, very clear in one of the biggest mandates we've ever had in this country electorally that we do not want to be a part of the European Union. But when Keir Starmer is taking us one direction, hopefully the Conservative Party will start to wake up and say, no, we need to go in the other direction. But of course, words and rhetoric are one thing and actions are another. The Conservative Party has shown that they're very good sometimes at words or rhetoric, but they're not very good at following through with actions. Whereas the Labour Party are not very good with words. They upset everyone every time they speak, but they do follow through with their actions. When they say they're going to clamp down on people like you and I, that's what they do, unfortunately.
Calvin, leftists are getting increasingly upset about Elon Musk's ownership of X, the app formerly known as Twitter. And of course, they're doing this thing that they always do, which is come close to quitting or threatening to quit. Do you remember all of the stuff like, oh, I'm not going to stay in the UK if Brexit happens? All of the celebrities said the same thing about Donald Trump in America. it doesn't happen. And the latest is Gary Lineker, who is the biggest gobshite on all of X. I think we can agree with that, even though it goes completely against the philosophy of the BBC and the fact that he is paid all of our license fee payer money and become really famous thanks to the BBC to express these views. But now he's saying that because of Elon Musk, he doesn't actually want to talk on Twitter, as he calls it. So he says, Calvin, I've changed my habits on Twitter. I don't really post my thoughts now because I think it has become not a very pleasurable experience. There was a time you could have little chats with people on there and a bit of banter, but now it is impossible because before I could have chats with people I either followed or were blue tick people, but now everyone's got a blue tick, so that doesn't work anymore. I've become a bit bored with it. It is a very unpleasant world, and Musk is clearly a very odd bloke. Yeah, you've got to be so odd, don't you, Calvin, to encourage freedom of speech. You know what's happened, Mr. Lineker? X is no longer your little left-wing echo chamber, and you don't like it because you're challenged. And how terrible that sometimes you're even challenged by ordinary folk without a blue tick. What did you make of this, Calvin?
Good, leave. But of course, you're right, they never do. They always threaten to leave. They always threaten to flounce off. He's not going to go anywhere because he loves the platform. He loves seeing his name out there. Every time he sees something controversial, the newspapers are all over it. Oh, Gary Lineker said, why do we care what Gary Lineker said? He used to play football a long time ago. We're over that. And actually, if the public knew some of the horrible stuff that he gets up to behind closed doors, then people would stop listening to what he has to say. Unfortunately, he has much more expensive lawyers than I have, so I can't repeat on air the things that he gets up to. But if people knew. However, these celebrities that are sick and tired of having ordinary folk tweet them because everyone's got a blue tick now. Well, good. What's wrong with a bit of meritocracy or equality? This is what they're always saying they're about, right? Equality of opportunities, equality of outcomes. Yeah, anyone can buy a blue tick now. You don't have to be some lefty liberal to get a blue tick. Surely that's a good thing. What, do you not want normal people talking to you? Why is that? Do normal people not share your opinions?
Yeah, indeed. And I do really like the fact, Calvin, that you pointed out that Lineker is a moral hypocrite, because trust me, he absolutely is. And where he's been very clever is ingratiating himself with key people within the mainstream media in order to shut down any critical reporting. So I saw it happen at my former employer, The Sun, where he's become incredibly close to its editor, Victoria Newton, feeds her lots of stories on other people, including stars of the BBC. And so as a result, she is slavish in her devotion to only running positive stories about Gary Lineker, which I find really hilarious.
It's almost like the mainstream media is corrupt and implicit in all the badness that goes on in the world.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Go with whoever pays them the best bucks or gets them the best stories.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, the thing that I just think, Calvin, about all of these people threatening to leave X, just go. You know, if you want to go, Alistair Campbell, if you want to go, Gary Lineker, if you are that threatened by actually being part of a genuine, open, public square, then go off into your own little echo chambers again. But people like me and people like you, Calvin, have been putting up with leftist trolling and attacks on our free speech for years and years and years. And actually, it was only Elon Musk taking ownership of that app which made us feel safe, that we weren't going to be banned like Graham Linehan and Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson, who all found themselves deplatformed at the behest of little snowflakes like Gary Lineker, who couldn't handle an opinion, even though in many cases, Calvin, that opinion was simply to say that a trans woman is actually not a woman biologically. That got you back.
Isn't it? They just don't want a level playing field. And that's all Elon Musk has brought. He hasn't made Twitter far right or right wing. He's just allowed a level playing field that says anyone can have an opinion now, as long as it's not actual incitement to violence, as long as it doesn't break the rules. He said we're not going to censor people just for being on the centre right. And that's the way that social media should work. Unfortunately, the other platforms aren't quite the same. But if we have a level playing field, then we have open discussion, we have open debate, we can find out what people really think, and we can challenge each other, we can challenge our own ideas. That all sounds quite positive to me. But of course, all they want is an echo chamber of lefty lovies, the media elite and the establishment all patting each other on the back and saying how good they are for having open borders and raping society of all its resources. How great that is that people can't get a hospital appointment or a dentist appointment or can't get their children to the local schools, or the churches are closing down and being sold into mosques. How wonderful our society is by being destroyed by the lefty liberal elite, because they're all sat there sipping champagne as the champagne socialists do, laughing at how good their life is while everyone else is being destroyed around them.
Totally true. And speaking of champagne socialists, Calvin, I've got to talk to you because it relates to X about this guy, Theo Usherwood. So do you remember he was a reporter, very Westminster bubble, sort of mainstream leftist liberal reporter who worked for LBC. And for some reason now seems to be constantly on GB News and Talk TV. But he appeared on the Sly News newspaper review just after this terror attack in Germany. And I posted an egregious clip on X which showed that his main concern was over the far right, not over the people who'd just been stabbed, the innocents, the fact that this was an illegal asylum seeker, the fact that ISIS was claiming responsibility. But no, his biggest concern was the fact that it could embolden the so-called far right. So this is the clip that I posted on X. This was on Saturday. It went viral. Watch.
When you look at something like this, you just really worry about how it could be used by those on the far right to stir up hatred. To look at this and say, well, here's the justification. This is why this will be jumped on by those on the far right to say, well, there's some justification to our cause, and that's concerning. And nobody, ISIS is a terrorist organisation. This is plainly being treated as a terrorist attack, as it should be. And the police and authorities should be able to do their work and bring the perpetrator, whoever it might be, to justice. But I do, it is concerning, I think, that potentially the way, this could play out. We've seen the rise of the riots in Germany, particularly, but also in this country and across Europe as well.
You know what, Yasmin, I saw on social media earlier, people saying, what did this person look like? Now, were they asking to do a public service so people keep an eye out if they are still at large? Or were they up to no good in asking that question?
No, and as Theo says, the whole riots thing and how it was instigated. And look, I'm a Muslim.
When you look at...
Now, Calvin, I found that whole exchange genuinely appalling. I wasn't attempting to stoke anything or take anything out of context or be irresponsible, but I thought it was absolutely critical to point out how the mainstream media think about these things. They are so deluded and so blinkered when it comes to the so-called scourge of the far right that actually they are more concerned about that than genuine Islamist terrorism. I mean, if you knew what had gone on in this German city, which Theo Usherwood did, to me it's absolutely impossible that that's how you could feel. This terrorist who was a Syrian, illegal, working for ISIS, Calvin, he literally went around with a massive knife and was slashing people specifically in the necks and their upper body because he was out to kill. And prosecutors have said he was out to kill Westerners because of an Islamist ideology. And he succeeded, Calvin, in killing 3 people. How can your concern after an incident be like that be about an imaginary far right in another country?
It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. First of all, for those 3 people who were killed, may light petrol shine upon them. And it's horrible that after their deaths, the mainstream media isn't praying for them or raising awareness. The mainstream media is painting a picture of a boogeyman who didn't commit the crime, who didn't perpetuate the crime. There was no far right criminal. This was clearly the opposite of that. And so they're painting a picture that doesn't help anyone, doesn't help society, doesn't help the victims, and it certainly doesn't help get the perpetrator locked up. But everything about that conversation annoyed me. So Yasmin Alibhai Brown, for example, she's a well-known racist. Why is she on the platform to begin with? Well, because she's a Mohammedan, so she's able to offer an apologist viewpoint for the perpetrator. The presenter on Sly News wasn't asking questions to find answers. He was asking leading questions in order to further push their left-wing view. When he says things like, why were people asking what the perpetrator looked like? It's quite a natural question.
Because he's on the loose.
Absolutely.
I mean, seriously, imagine Lee Harvey Oswald just having murdered JFK in that assassination, and the police wouldn't release that this was a young white man. Don't be so ridiculous. This guy was on the loose. Of course you have to say what ethnic group he came from. No, I couldn't agree more.
Assumption is just wicked. But then also, of course, Theo, his whole perspective there was not anything to do with the victims, anything to do with the crime. No. It was he is exactly why we have so many grooming gang scandals in this country. His line of thinking that we must not let this out, we must not let people know the truth.
Yes.
Otherwise,
and look
they will
away.
see that diversity.
Look away because it might upset people and people might get angry. Exactly. Yeah. But Calvin, look, because this went viral all around the world and millions of people have seen that clip, thanks to me shining a light on it, I would have been happy to move on. Apart from the fact, Calvin, this dropkick, this loser, Theo Usherwood, decided to go on to GB News last night, ironically, my old show, and claim, Calvin, that I had in some way been intellectually dishonest in terms of the way that I presented the clip. So this is what he had to say about that. Let's watch along.
Terrible events in Germany. I mean, terrible events in Germany.
Look, I just wanted you to
I appreciate it.
No,
I appreciate it.
I hope you do, because I don't mean this in a sinister way or anything at all.
No.
I don't want you to be able to come back to that, because I know you a bit, and I think the implication from that was, if you just look at that clip in isolation, maybe the focus was, I hope this doesn't whip up the far right, as opposed to, what an awful terrorist attack this is.
Well, I called it a terrorist attack, and I condemned it as a terrorist attack. And actually, I'm not going to turn this into some sort of personal back and forth, but the clip was edited, and at the beginning of my exchange on Sky News, I called it a terrible event that had happened in Germany. So I'm unequivocal in the fact that what had happened was a terrible event, it was a terrorist attack, and it was unfairly clipped. And I pointed that out, and you can see that on my Twitter feed. The point of...
Look,
Calvin, it wasn't unfairly clipped. I will actually show you how briefly he said it was a terrible event. And what does a terrible event actually mean? Look at this.
I mean, terrible events in Germany. 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 I mean, terrible events.
So that was it. that was it.
He didn't even breathe between words. A terrible events. Like he was struggling to say it. He didn't want to say it.
No, and he never pointed out that this was an Islamist attack.
Right, of course not.
And that we need to be concerned about the fact that this was committed by someone illegally in Germany. None of that. As soon as he moved on to the opinion, it became very clear that all he wanted to do was use this terrible terrorist attack to try and effectively bring down a bogeyman, the far right that doesn't even exist in this country, actually, because the people who he's referring to are just ordinary folk who are worried about their children or their husband or their wife being stabbed to death by an Islamist. Like, how on earth does that make you far right? But Calvin, I want to watch on, because then we're going to come to basically the most bizarre 3 minutes of television I've seen, where my successor on this GB News show literally lets this guy come up with the most bizarre explanation as to why he said what he said with absolutely no pushback. So let's watch along, Calvin.
The point I was making is that if you look at what ISIS, if you read the story, it was a story in the Sunday Express, and actually I've got Sunday Express, fine newspaper, and they just reported it factually, right? So I'm not making this is not a criticism of the Sunday Express at all. ISIS are referring to this individual, this suspect, as a soldier. It read like a recruiting leaflet for ISIS to say, here, if you do this, if you commit something like this, you're a hero, you're a soldier. But it also read, and ISIS don't care for Muslims. They have no, for law-abiding, and 99.9999% of people, Muslim people, they have no truck with this, and ISIS don't care for them, and they don't care of any reprisal attacks. What they're trying to do is they are trying to pick away at the fabric of our society, the fabric of our democracy, and they're doing that by trying to provoke a reaction. And what they were doing, what that attack was about is trying to provoke a reaction to have a two extremes, where it's ISIS or on the far right.
No,
and I don't care about ISIS and I don't care about the far right. The people I care about, because I love this country, right? These are the people I care about, and I don't want to get dragged into this. And I'm sure everybody at GB News would share this sentiment. I care about. Let's just deal with ISIS to start off with. I care about young Muslim men who might be at home, isolated, might be on their computer screens watching YouTube, and they might see this and think, actually, I want to be a hero too. I want to be a soldier too. So I'm going to go and copy this. And I also care about young white working class men who might be at home and they might get a message on their phone, a WhatsApp or a Telegram saying, look at what happened in Germany. Well, why don't you do something about it? Because if you don't do something about it, nobody will do anything about it. Why don't you come down? We're going to go and protest down at a hotel of asylum seekers. Why don't we go and have it might get a bit rowdy. Why don't you come down and join us at that hotel and we'll throw something at the police, or we'll try and set fire to it. We're going to take the law into our own hands. Germany, this country, we are modern, mature democracies with effective intelligence services, effective police forces, effective judicial systems. The only response to an attack like this is to let those agencies get on with the job and bring individuals to justice. And if you're a young man and you're seeing that WhatsApp from a member of the far right and you're saying, come down and take part in this, and you go and take part in that you go and take part in that right, you're a member of the far right and you're a racist. But if you make the decision that actually that isn't the answer, that's not the way to do things, and actually you're a law-abiding citizen, and yes, you're worried about immigration, and yes, you're worried about the fact we're spending £7 million a day on asylum seeker hotels, and yes, you're worried about the fact that there are small boats crossings. You could be worried about all those things, but if you stay at home and you say, actually, I'm not going to take part in the violence, I'm not going to go and attack a hotel, I'm not going to go and throw stuff at the police, then you're not a racist, and you're not a member of the far right. And you can voice it in a legitimate way. Absolutely.
Yeah, fair enough. Theo, look, thank you.
I hope that clears it up.
Well, I think it does. And thank you for...
Really? Really?
It clears it up. In what way does it clear it up?
I didn't take that out of context, just to be clear. I had to play you that full horror show.
Right.
I mean, not only has the guy been intellectually dishonest, but I actually think he's proving my point. Because yet again, he's creating some sort of bogeyman and effectively saying that Brits should just sit back and do absolutely nothing and trust the authorities that have let us down for years and years and years. And that's different between going out and firebombing a hotel. There's a happy medium there, Calvin.
This guy is clearly delusional. He thinks that terrorists attack our country or any country in order to provoke the far right. What? First of all, there is no far right in the United Kingdom. Secondly, terrorists attack because they want to terrorize, they want to destroy, they do not like our way of life. And that's why they attack us. They're not provoking the far right. And if people get upset with what's going on, that doesn't make them far right. He's really creating this boogeyman in his head. He's got this scenario where, oh my gosh, if they find out it was a Mohammedan, they're going to go down and attack hotels. Like, who's doing that? Who's suggesting that? Where's he getting these ideas from? And when he said in his original clip that, the far right are going to be jumping on this, well, I get called far right all the time. And yes, I am jumping on this because he is part of the problem. People are getting stabbed to death. People are dying because of people like him being complicit, attempting to cover it up, not wanting the true details out there because they're afraid of this boogeyman of the far right. And if they continue down this path, there will be a far right because the pendulum will swing so far in the other direction that we will have people standing up and getting violent. That's what we all want to avoid. So people like Theo are the problem.
And we do know, by the way, that people are entering this country illegally, that they are raping our women. We know that is a fact. Some of them are trying to kill us. That is a fact. And if you look at the time that the MI5 devotes to Islamic extremism versus so-called far-right terrorism, it doesn't even compare. It doesn't even compare. So I don't think Theo Usherwood clarified anything there. I think it very much speaks to the downfall of our former employer, that he is now the type of commentator they want to employ, just like he's the type of guy that goes on Sly News and parrots this sort of rubbish. And I think it's really disappointing, the whole thing. But as I say, I wouldn't have done that unless he had just claimed on national television that I had taken something out of context. No, they are your words. You stand by them just like I stand by everything that I say on this show. And if I'm posting a clip that's 1 minute, 8 seconds long and contains absolutely no edits whatsoever, I am not taking you out of context. But look, Calvin, stand by, because Katie Hopkins has just broken down in a really emotional interview about her cancellation by the Church of England. I'm going to show you what she has to say and get Calvin's reaction. He's a friend of Katie Hopkins in just one moment. But first, you know what's so important about being independent is I only ever tell you about products that I use and believe will really improve your life. So that's why I am delighted today to talk about Verso. So let me tell you about my story in regards to this product. I entered my 40s, decided to get very healthy after a stressful year, exercising, trying to sleep better, all of that type of stuff, and doing the 16/8 fast as well. But I researched and found that scientists like David Sinclair have proven we can now reverse aging with interventions that go beyond healthy habits. So I was looking for a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, but one that was backed up by really solid evidence. That product is Cell-Being by Verso. It's scientifically proven to include ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels, which is the stuff that powers every cell in your body. I've been taking the product for a number of months. At the start of my day, it's been genuinely transformative. Fasting is easier. I've lost fat. I'm eating less too. And the team at Verso tell me that it's due to its blood sugar regulation effects, which lead to fewer cravings. It's also really helped my sleep. Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced, so you're guaranteed that you're getting exactly what you paid for, which is really important. And I'm delighted to say that because Verso is my first ever sponsor here on Outspoken, the brilliant deal continues today. If you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order. All you need to do is use the coupon code Outspoken where you check out. The link is in our show notes on YouTube and Rumble, so you can click directly from there, or I'll spell it out for you, buy.ver.so/outspoken, and use the coupon code Outspoken. And now back to the show. And Katie Hopkins has broken down over her disgusting cancellation by the Church of England, which has refused her performance at one of their venues. This is for her major new stand-up show, even though this same venue has hosted previously political events by the Extinction Rebellion crazies and drag queens. But for Katie, this was absolutely devastating, given that she had sold 500 tickets to the event. And when she was trying to come to an arrangement with this particular organisation connected to the Church of England, they very much upset her. And you know, Katie is obviously usually seen in public as someone who has a tough exterior and has coped with cancellation, I think, much better than many people could, because let me tell you, I know a lot about this. It takes a massive psychological toll. This one really got to her and she broke down. Watch.
And they came back with, for the avoidance of doubt, these purported losses are vague, unsubstantiated and embarrassing. And that's the bit that's really got me. Is that even when I said, all right, you know, I don't mind, or I do mind, but I don't mind, you've cancelled me, could we refund people's travel and time and hotel and things? And to be told that is vague, it's 500 tickets, but anyway, vague, unsubstantiated and embarrassing. And I have to say, you know, I know the law's not the law. I know there's no such thing as democracy, right? I know to question everything. But there is still this sort of small part in your soul, having spent so much time in America, that hopes about a church. You know, I know Archbishop of Canterbury will be such a disappointment. I see the church really, you know, throwing itself away. But I know people out there who have faith. And I say that your path's already set. You know, I have belief that my path is set. And now I have to believe that the church in particular represented by here, has nothing to do with my kind of faith that you're... And
Father Calvin Robertson, as a disappointed member of the Church of England, how do you feel about that?
It's gutting, isn't it? It's clearly an agenda, an ideological agenda. This is the problem with the Church of England. It's so left-wing, so liberal, they can't see past its own nose and see the fact that faithful masses may be meeting, or even just friendly people may be meeting in the church that don't happen to be left-wing. Why make a deal with Katie Hopkins in the first place? You know who she is. You know what she stands for. She's very good at what she does. But let her do her job. Don't cancel on her last minute and then refuse to help out with funding all the people that are supposed to be travelling down to see the event. But the way they treated her is like she's less than a human being. The job of the church is to treat everyone like they are human beings. Every single human life is sacred, and that we're all equal in the eyes of God in terms of dignity and worth. That's the message of the church. Also, yes, that we're all sinners, but we are all included in God's plan. And we're all welcomed into his church. His church is for sinners, all of us. So to say that Katie Hopkins is not welcome says that she's less than a sinner. What does that mean about her? What is the church trying to say about Katie Hopkins? It's absolutely outrageous. They should be ashamed of themselves. But this is the Church of England. So I think shame is where they live. That's their normal kind of being at the moment, unfortunately.
And Calvin, you've spent some time with Katie recently ahead of the Uniting the Kingdom rally. Do you feel like her cancellation was unfair, and is there a chance for her to return to public life? Because it's so disturbing, Calvin, the way that she was debanked well before Farage. You know, she owns nothing. I mean, we can't accept, can we, someone being treated in this way?
Not at all. We shouldn't accept it if we want a fair and equitable society. If we want equal opportunities for all, if we want a meritocracy where anyone can achieve as long as they work hard, get their head down and focus, then that's the world we should be aiming for. Then people like Katie Hopkins should have a chance. But to say, no, you're beyond the pale because you're a comedian that makes jokes that we see are not fit for purpose, that is tyranny of the worst sort. That's tyranny of the mind. That's saying you must think like we think, otherwise you are not welcome in civilized society. You know, to debank someone means you're not able to contribute to, you're not able to make a living or provide for your family. It's dangerous. It's actually absolutely dangerous. It's the kind of things that the Stasi would do. You know, the commies would do this. The Nazis would do this. So to see it happening in liberal democracies, or so-called liberal so-called democracies, is astounding. Katie Hopkins has not actually said anything that bad or done anything that bad. Yes, she used to be quite controversial in her time on breakfast TV, but those days are long gone. She's now a very successful comedian who's producing very good content. And I say that as someone who doesn't generally find female comedians funny. Katie Hopkins is funny. And so it's great to see, her work. So let's appreciate it.
Yeah. And what's she like, Calvin?
I find her to be a lovely person who genuinely cares. So we've had some conversations about this event, Uniting the Kingdom, which is, again, about uniting the people of Great Britain, because we're so divided right now. And that's partly because of the establishment, partly because of our politicians, partly because of the mainstream media. But I've sat around the table with Katie, and she's a listener. So she's not just rabbiting on about her own opinion. She's taking on board what everyone else thinks too. And we all came to similar ideas about how we can bring people together around their Britishness, around their Christian values. She was very clear. We had lots of conversations about this, that Christianity is important for our country. She was very explicit about that. So her faith is important to her too. And so for the Church of England to say, no, actually, we don't see you as a Christian, is bonkers, because who is the Church of England to judge, especially these days?
Yeah, I mean, I've got quite an interesting history with Katie, because we were both columnists at the same time at The Sun and used to butt heads, actually. But I've always had huge respect for her, even when she has said some quite horrendous things about me, especially during my time at GB News. And I respect the fact that she goes against the grain and she has deeply intellectual conversations. And also, she is so smart. She is so smart. And what I found absolutely fascinating about this deeply personal address to her followers is it was the first time really in a long time that she has expressed the really real personal side of what it's like to be cancelled. And there's a really key line here. I mean, it's quite a lengthy clip, but it's worth us both watching along, Calvin, where she says, "I'm not a monster and I will not be beaten. Watch.
So that has just been a lot, and the honesty of what I'm trying to do is I'm not just going out there doing stand-up for the love of it. I'm doing it because I think it's important. I think it's needed. I know what it's like in those rooms, and it's amazing. I also accept that I'll be punished for doing what I'm trying to do, and I accept that. It doesn't mean I don't feel hurt and upset, because I'm not a monster. But I will not be beaten. We will not be beaten. And I just wanted to say thank you. I can't say it too much because it will set me off again.
I find her inspiring. I think people are really taken by her honesty because they know that she is completely unvarnished, completely unfiltered. And the thing is, Calvin, and no one wants to acknowledge this in the mainstream media, Katie Hopkins is way more powerful now than when she had a column in The Sun and a radio show on LBC. I promise you that. Some people won't believe that. But there was a brilliant article in the American mainstream media this week about Megyn Kelly and she's obviously a friend of both of ours in America, cancelled in a very similar way, actually, to Katie Hopkins, maybe not quite so brutally. But now her show is more popular than virtually every mainstream media outlet in the US, and her voice has never been more heard. And I think the same thing is happening with Katie Hopkins. Maybe we're just a little bit behind the US, though. And I think it's insane that venues are still trying to cancel her. I mean, Megyn Kelly goes around and is, about to give this big performance with Tucker Carlson, and they find huge arenas. So, I think there's hope. I guess that's what I'm saying. I think there's hope. I think Katie Hopkins is sort of uncancelled now, but clearly not when it comes to the establishment.
The thing is, what the left often forgets is that we're all human beings, right? Even that idiot that threw whatever he threw at Nigel Farage, they just see us as the enemy. They see us as an opponent. They don't see us as human beings. Katie Hopkins, yeah, she may be tough. She may have been cancelled 100 times, but this time it got to her because she's a person with feelings. If the left could only see people who don't think like them as equal to them in terms of dignity and wealth, dignity and worth, if they could just see us as human beings and people with emotions, with cares, with loves, then we'd all be in a much better place. But the left do not seem to be able to do that because they can only see their own worldview, they can only see their own perspective, their own bubble. But I'm with you that there is hope. Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, these people are the most influential people in media now, and none of them are in the mainstream media. This is why the mainstream media continues to lash out, because it's afraid and it resents what the independent media can do. You are much more powerful and influential now that you've left good GBN, because they are restricted. They have limits. And we just saw some of their, this is the first time actually I've seen any of the content in a long time. That show with Patrick Christie's was not a good show. There was no pushback, just a lot of nodding, but that's what he does. Anyway,
because he doesn't want to get in trouble because he saw what happened to me.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. And they are completely controlled by the off-communists. And what's really interesting, Calvin, I was very taken, I think we've got it actually by one of your posts on X about what's actually happening in terms of the censorship state. And you made the point, they go after X and Elon Musk, they arrest the CEO of Telegram, yet they go quiet when Meta, Facebook, Instagram is found to be enabling child sex abuse and trafficking. The establishment hunts down free speech advocates but turns a blind eye to pedos. And clearly that's a very dramatic way to put it, but it's so hard to disagree with that when you see the way that there is lawfare now going on against both X and Telegram, and that's simply because the authorities do not control it, specifically the American authorities.
100%. I'm not a free speech absolutist, though I believe in free speech for the purposes of spreading the truth. What I want to see clamped down upon on social media is all of this child grooming, is all this child pornography, this paedophilia that is rampant, especially on Meta, that keeps getting reported, on Instagram and Facebook. I want to see a clamp down upon the people who actually incite violence. I want to see actual criminals, violent thugs, rapists, sex offenders, paedophiles locked up and or deported. if not hanged. I want to see severe punishments for the bad guys. What I want to see at the same time is a free space for people to discuss ideas, whether they disagree with each other, whether they offend each other or not. That would be fantastic. X provides that. Telegram has been providing that. And this is why those two platforms are being clamped down upon, because the people in charge cannot or will not, for whatever reason, address violent crime, sex abuse, and or paedophilia. We can all allude to or speculate to why that might be, but I think a lot of it comes down to incompetence. Let's get back to facing real crime, get tough on crime, and stop locking down people for hurting words on Facebook and retweeting misinformation on Twitter. For goodness sake, let's get some common sense back in the room.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's stop deplatforming people like Katie Hopkins, although actually all you're doing is making her more popular and making the people who follow her more angry than ever. Father Calvin Robinson, my goodness, we've covered it all today. Thank you so much, Calvin, and we will speak next week.
God bless you, Dan. See you soon.
Are you back in the UK, by the way?
I am. I'm still in political exile, but I'm not telling people where I am. I managed to make it over the border without a piece.
Okay, sorry, I've blown your cover. Calvin, thank you so much. We'll speak next week. But you know, it's very important to me that we have a safe space not patrolled by big tech, where censorship and control runs deep. So let me tell you about www.outspoken.live. It is our membership section where you will get half an hour of extra content every single weekday. So what we do at this stage is come off YouTube, we come off Rumble, we move to our own platform to continue the conversation in the Uncancelled After Show. Today, I've got a brilliant one for you, especially if you're a royal fan. The YouTube sensation, according to Taz, joins me, and there's big breaking news about how Prince Harry is intending to sully the legacy of his mother, Princess Diana, in New York. We're going to be telling you all about that, plus much, much more from the brilliant According to Taz. So all you have to do, if you want to watch, is right now head to www.outspoken.live. If you register there by entering your details, you can then pay just £5 a month. It's about the cost, right, of a cup of coffee in Manchester or Liverpool or London these days. But what that money allows me to do is continue producing this show completely independently. So I'm not owned by billionaires. I'm not controlled by the off-communists. And that is all thanks to that support. And that support also does give you the after show every day. So I hope you think that you're getting something in return too. Remember, though, too, to subscribe here, because we are back live every weekday at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Most importantly, I'll always keep fighting for you. See you on the after show in just 1 minute.